Well, Reuben, it's official. I'm not coming back. I like it too much here in Palm Beach.
Dave Zangaro is staying in Florida. He'll cover the Eagles from remotely. Well, we've done it for the last couple of years, so
Yeah.
I'm sure you can make it work.
Every time they come to play the Dolphins, I'll make the trip to Miami. I can do that.
Jaguars.
Yeah, we can do that. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast with Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. We have a lot today. Quite a bit of information to pack in to a podcast. We heard from Jeffrey Lurie for the first time in 14 months. So a lot's happened in that time frame. So we'll get into some of that, what he said on Tuesday night at the owners' meetings. Also, a bunch of stuff from Nick Sirianni's half-hour press conference earlier that day. And we'll talk about Kelly Green jerseys. I know everyone is excited about that. But some news right before we recorded this podcast. Malcolm Jenkins announcing his retirement from the NFL.
Yeah, great career. Had so much to do with that 2017 championship team. I didn't realize this, but made 3 Pro Bowls in his career, every one as an Eagle. Mm-hmm. So he really had his best seasons here. He turned 34 a couple months ago. It's been a great run.
It really has. And so many other people get credit for the success of the team. He's right up there at the top of the list. And he was every bit the player that he was the leader, and every bit the leader he was the player. Sometimes I think leadership is kind of overblown, but in his case, it meant a lot to those teams. And simply put, like, he's Eagles Hall of Famer for sure. Right?
No question about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All-time great player. I was actually surprised they gave out his number as quickly as they did. Not that they should have retired it, but sometimes they kind of wait to give a number out, and they gave it to Zach McPherson, I thought, a little too soon. They gave it to him last year, only 2 years after Malcolm left. But one of the greatest free agent signings in Eagles history. It could be the best. I mean, I know there's some other competition, but it's up there.
Yeah, I'd probably still put Troy Vincent ahead of him. But yeah, I mean, he's in the top few up there with Ricky Waters and Irving Fryer and John Runyon. Yeah, Runyon would be up there. If you go by Pro Bowls, I think Troy made 5 of them, something like that.
Yeah, I think Troy had an All-Pro or 2 in there.
Yeah, Troy was really, really good. But yeah, but certainly he's in that conversation. And I think, to me, and I was thinking when I read Rob Maaddi's little tweet there, and I was thinking about Malcolm and his role in 2017. And I think obviously he was a great player, but that was such a kind of patchwork team. There was so many guys who were coming and going. I mean, the Corey Grahams and Patrick Robinsons and Jay Ajays and LeGarrette Blunts, they were like, like they were like carpetbaggers who just it all kind of happened to come together. But Malcolm was like the glue on that team. He was a guy who'd been here. He'd established himself as a Pro Bowl player and as a locker room leader. And I think that team really needed Malcolm to kind of tie everything together. And Malcolm was one of those guys who you would see offensive guys at his locker. I mean, that's how well respected he was in that building, in that locker room. And you don't see that very often where, offensive guys needed guidance or leadership or just had a question or just wanted to BS. You don't see a whole lot of, intermingling between sides of the football. But Malcolm really, one of those guys who led effortlessly, organically, didn't try to be a leader. It was so natural for him. And, and he understood his role. And when there was anything happening with the team, he was at his locker to talk about it. And, he never shied away from that. We know what he did in the community, really made a terrific impact in Philadelphia with his charity work and also in New Orleans and also up in North Jersey in his hometown and
Columbus, Ohio. He's still.
You're right. Where he went to Ohio State. And, I think his role on that 2017 team really can't be overstated because he was just kind of the glue that held it all together with all the comings and goings and newcomers and guys who weren't really. I think when you bring in so many new guys, you wonder about their commitment, like that. they weren't born and raised Eagles. They haven't been here before. They don't understand the culture. And when you have a guy like Malcolm, who's a fixture, it kind of, they kind of gravitate toward him, and that culture kind of emanates from him. And I think the other guys pick up on it and fit into it because of Malcolm, if that makes sense. And I think that was a big part of his value during that run.
Yeah, I think everything you need to know about him and how important he was to that team is the speech that we've heard about. Obviously, we didn't see it, but the speech he gave in the locker room in Los Angeles in December after the quarterback tore his ACL and LCL. And I mean, that was a really pivotal moment in that team's history. And it was Malcolm that got up in front of them and said, because we remember everyone had this look. They just won the game. They just clinched the division, and everyone in the locker room looked like their best friend just died. And it was Malcolm that got up in front of them and said, "Guys, we're not done. This is not over." And he believed it, but even if he didn't, it didn't matter because he had to kind of galvanize them in that moment, and he did. And yeah, you're right. The job he did that year, not just that year. I mean, throughout his time, and it's funny because he wasn't always universally liked because of it, because he was a tough leader. He didn't lead by just being friends with everyone and trying to say what they wanted to hear. He was a tough leader at times. He would tell guys what they didn't want to hear, but he knew they needed to. And yeah, it wasn't like everyone loved him all the time. And I think that's like the next level of leadership is being willing to say those things, sometimes publicly, about your friends and your teammates because you wanted to get the most out of them. I have so much respect for that guy. And it just from a personal standpoint, he was a pleasure to deal with. And I appreciated his thoughtfulness and explaining. And especially, he kind of became a face of a movement for a while there after Colin Kaepernick was out of the league. And I respected his commitment to that because he would stand. I mean, how long would he stand in his locker and just answer question after question after question, dopey question after dopey question after dopey question, because he knew that's what he had to do.
Yeah, and he became a real spokesman for that cause and Black Lives Matter and the New York Times and Washington Post, and like whenever they needed that interview, they would send a guy to NovaCare Complex to interview Malcolm, and he was always there patiently answering questions, and he saw that as part of his job and part of his reason for being here. Getting back to what you said about the Rams game in 2017, I remember talking to him in the hallway. We weren't allowed in the locker room that night. Remember?
Yeah. Well, that was predetermined. The Coliseum is a mess.
Right. It was even before the injury. That was the policy. Was all the interviews had to be in this concourse outside the locker room with these freaking carts going by in each way, and it was diesel fumes everywhere. But Malcolm came out, I remember, and we talked to him for a good long while, and I think he basically was paraphrasing his speech. And I remember just thinking how special his comments were, and I think he really gave that team the belief it needed to continue that run. And he had been on a Super Bowl team, so he had that gravitas, I guess, when he spoke about a Super Bowl. He's a guy who won one with New Orleans, so he knew what he was talking about. And they listened, and I'm sure a lot went into what happened after that injury, and a lot of it had to do with the quarterback, but a lot had to do with Malcolm. And just if you don't believe you can do it, you're not going to do it. And he helped instill that belief that even though our quarterback got hurt, that doesn't mean we're not a great team, and they proved it.
And he's living in the city. He's still a Philly guy. I think his business is still in Philadelphia, and the charity work. So we'll see him around. I know things didn't necessarily end great. He felt a little undervalued when he left in free agency after the 2019 season, but I think that'll kind of blow over. Those things happen in the league, and it wasn't like a terrible breakup. So Hopefully we see him at the Link this year. That'd be great.
I would think that's going to happen.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to what we already planned to talk about. And thank you to Malcolm for announcing his retirement before the podcast. That's why we like him.
Howie called him and told him to wait till 3:00. He's
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
"Oh."
All right. So Jeff Lurie, we'll get into the real meat and potatoes of the football side of it. But the Kelly Green jerseys finally announces that in 2023, so not this coming season, the following season, they'll bring back the Kelly Green alternate jerseys. And it's kind of silly, but it's something that you and I know from interacting with fans over the course of however many years. It's something the fan base really cared about, or at least a lot of fans really cared about. So it is cool that it's coming back.
Yeah, and I've been covering the team so long that nobody complained that they weren't wearing them because they were wearing them. But you're right. It's something. I mean, we've heard for years, and there were logistical reasons they couldn't do it. I think Jeff Lurie's always wanted to, but now he's able to, and fans seem happy. I've said this before. I'm not big on uniform. It's just one thing I just never really cared about when I was growing up as a kid. And just this uniform, that uniform, this color, that.
Well, back then they were in black and white, so it didn't really matter.
No, that was just photography. But no, I just it never really resonated with me. But obviously, it does with a lot of people. So yeah, it'll be fun to see.
I don't know what I'm going to do with myself at owners meetings in future years, because this was always like the story I'd have to chase. I remember one time, because there used to be a rule that the reason they couldn't do it before was because you couldn't have multiple helmets, and Jeff didn't want to go with the decal, so he wanted the Kelly Green helmet. So I remember chasing Rich McKay, who's the competition committee chairman, like down the hallway in Boca back in like the 20s, or maybe I don't know where it was. It was some beautiful resort, and I'm like sprinting through the hallways to catch up with them. And then I get there, I'm like out of breath. I'm like, alternate helmets. And he's like, did you just run here to ask me about helmets? But yeah, it's all over. And in the interim, they're going to use black helmets as their alternate in 2022. And then they're going to push to get a third helmet so they can have two alternates in future years. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah. We'll see. But yeah, a lot of people are happy about it. So I'm happy.
You seem happy. All right, let's get to the real meat of it, though. It was our first time chatting with Jeff Lurie since, well, he gave an opening statement, a lengthy opening statement when he hired Nick Sirianni. But the last time he took questions was after he fired Doug Peterson. So we're talking about 14 months without really asking the owner questions on the record. And a lot's happened since then. The former quarterback has gotten traded twice.
He was asked about the quarterback getting traded, and he could have said which time. It's crazy. And one quick thing, I wish he spoke more often. He used to. When he first bought the team, he would talk at length, answer questions at training camp, and then he would do something after the season, and then he would talk at the owners' meetings. So I think he used to talk like 3 times a year. I wish he did. He owns the team, and he's got a lot to say. He's got a lot of things to answer every year. So I wish he did talk more often, but you take what you can get.
Yeah, and he always says, "I love doing this," and then we always say, "Let's do it more."
Yeah,
we're here. But let's get into some of the big topics. To me, one of the top ones was about his influence, and I don't really necessarily agree with the term meddling, but his involvement in football decisions. It's a big topic of conversation because, he has people who he deems are experts in these positions to make these decisions. But of course, he's going to play some role in the major ones because he's the owner of the team. Do you buy what he said about him actually being less involved in recent years?
I do. I think he used to be. I think when he first bought the team, I don't think this is what he was referring to. When he first bought the team, I think he meddled too much. And again, it's not really meddling. He owns the team, so it's not meddling because it is his business. But the meddling part is when it's with personnel and stuff that he's not really qualified.
Yeah, because he's not
a personnel.
That's not his job necessarily. Yeah. He has people in those positions.
It's his right. It's just not his job.
I like that. I might use that. I might steal that.
But yeah, I really don't think it's a huge deal. I don't think it's a huge thing. I mean, he's he's very hands-on owner, and I've seen the opposite. I've seen what it's like to have an owner who lives in Miami and has car dealerships and has no real connection to the team and the city and the franchise and the fans. I mean, when the coach is calling him the guy in France because he's always on vacation in France, that's not a good sign. You never saw Norman Bremen. He wouldn't even be at the home games. So I've seen what the flip side of this looks like, and I'll take an involved owner anytime. So I don't think there's anything unusual about his involvement. He's going to be involved with key decisions, and he should be. I certainly don't think he's telling any coach to throw the ball more or run the ball more. I don't believe that he's ever done that. I think he has a philosophy that you win in the NFL by throwing the ball, which I agree with. And I think he's not going to ever hire somebody who doesn't go along with that. And this kind of relates to stuff we're going to talk about later with Nick. But I just don't think it's a big issue with him. I really don't.
Yeah, and it's really tough to figure out exactly how big an issue it is. I think he is involved, and I think he's involved more than he probably wants people to believe he's involved in those decisions, if that makes sense. So the way he posed it yesterday was he could think of 3 moments in his time as the owner where he's, what did he say, overstepped or given too much of an opinion or overrooted, was the phrase
right.
he used for an outcome. And I mean, the 3 he gave were Lane Johnson in 2013, Russell Wilson in 2012, and Jordan Mailata in 2018. And I mean, there are more than that, and there are ones that didn't make him look like a genius, because if that's his track record, then medal away.
He should be GM.
Yeah, absolutely. GM forever. So that part was laughable. But he is involved, and he was kind of pressed on it.
Pressed, I get it.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, about it, because I think he does make a distinction between player decisions and coaching staff decisions. That was pretty clear in his response to a very good question from Tim McManus of ESPN, who didn't let him get away with the 3 examples, because he said, well, what about, the coaching staff? And when Doug Pearson wanted to bring back everyone multiple times, and Lurie did admit there that no, that's part of his job as the owner, the CEO. He said he's not going to tell a coach who to hire, but it's his job to manage their coaching staff and make sure they're getting the most out of that coaching staff. And that holds true. I mean, we've seen that from him. It's the reason, one of the major reasons Doug Pearson wasn't a coach last year.
Right. And so I don't think it was necessarily, the fact that Doug wanted to hire X, Y, and Z. It was the fact that I think they were always a little disappointed that Doug didn't take a more active role in hiring coaches. I think that goes back to keeping all the chips guys, 9 of them or 10 of them, whatever, when he got the job. A lot of whom turned out to be really good coaches on the Super Bowl team. So I don't think it was the individual coaches. I think they wanted a vision from Doug moving forward after, his last season, what turned out to be his last season. And his vision was just running it back with, Press Taylor and Carson Walsh and, whoever, who's the
Matt Burke.
Matt Burke. So I don't think it was the individual guys. I think it was just Doug's refusal to give them any kind of vision about moving the franchise forward, because the franchise was in a bad place after 2020, and they wanted to know how he was going to lead them out of it. And so I don't think it was really the fact that, I don't think it had anything to do with any individual coach. I think it had more to do with Doug's, lack of interest in building a staff that they thought could help the Eagles move forward and move in a positive direction. And I understand that. I mean, but I also understand that Doug just won a Super Bowl 2 years earlier, and he deserves some benefit of the doubt when it comes to building a staff, but it's something Doug was never interested in. Probably admittedly, he would probably tell you that. He didn't have any big coaching book like Andy Reid did when he got here. He just, what about this guy Phipp? Yeah, he's pretty good. All right, I'll keep him. What about this Corey Youngland? Yeah, he's okay. All right, I'll keep him. I mean, that's how he built a staff, and it worked. But there was a point where a lot of those guys had left, and he had to build a new staff, and he just didn't have a real sense of how to do that. So I think that's why Jeffrey. I mean, I think that's why Doug isn't here anymore, is because that was a big part of it. Like you said, it was. I don't think it really had to do with any one coach as much as Doug not wanting to, go in a different direction. So I can see both sides of that. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one, and it's in a way, I think fans would probably agree with Jeff's assessment of that, but maybe not like that he's dictating it, if that makes sense. Like maybe he came to the right conclusion, but is it overstepping? Are you kind of taking away the power from a guy who maybe should have been given that right to make those decisions? You're right. You can see both sides of it. You really can.
Yeah, and I think there are other things. I mean, it's been a couple of years, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But I think when I look at Doug and 2020, when he comes out, like in Jacksonville, he kept saying how much he needed that year off and how good it was for him. How he's recharged, and you can see he's re-energized. And I think if that's the case, we could all tell that at the end of 2020, and we're going a little off topic here, but we could all tell he was burned out and he needed a break. And I think they could tell that too. And I think the coaching part was a piece of that, but I don't think it was the only reason that they moved on from him.
Okay, that's fair. Julian Lurie, who's kind of a mysterious figure in the grand scheme of the franchise. He's Jeff Lurie's son, in his mid-20s. Don't know I know he was born in 1995. I don't know when his birthday is, so he's 26 or 27. But this, at the owners' meetings on Tuesday night, was really one of the first times I think Jeffrey's ever spoken publicly about Julian's.
I think it's the first time.
This is the first time. I mean, I think so. Yeah, spoken about his son and the potential that one day he'll take over the franchise. And we've known, look, this is the way it works with families who own NFL teams. They pass it on. And we know that Julian, he went through the NFL's rotational program a couple years ago. It's a 2-year rotational program. You go through pretty much every aspect of the league. You try to learn about it. We know that he's been, maybe involved isn't the word, but he's been around for coaching searches, because that's obviously a big part of ownership. And just this offseason, which is really what kind of kicked it off, we saw him on the sideline at the Senior Bowl, we used to see Jeff Lurie on the sideline at the Senior Bowl. So, interesting. And it's the funny thing is Jeffrey said he hasn't spoke. Yeah, he doesn't know if Julian aspires to one day be the owner and CEO of the team. It's just never come up.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second. Dinner table conversation just once.
One day Julian's gonna be like, Dad, I'm gonna go run out to 7-Eleven. By the way, I'll take over when you're done.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is a plan B. So but yeah, if you ever look down on the sidelines, Julian looks a little like Brian Seltzer. You think?
Okay, yeah.
Looks a little. So you see a guy who's around Jeff Lurie or Christina Lurie, and he looks a little like Brian Seltzer. That's Julian Lurie, Harvard educated, sharp kid from everything we hear. But it's a really interesting time. I mean, Jeff has owned the team bought the team in 94. So, they're going to 28 years. He's 70 years old now. And it's a topic that you have to think about because, people can own sports franchises until, a very, very advanced age. I think, then Marge Schott owned the Reds and she was like in her 90s. But you have to have a succession plan at some point. And it certainly sounds like, it looks like it's heading that way. I don't think Julian Lurie goes through the rotational program and puts that kind of effort and time into it unless he's interested in running the team operations one day. So I would expect that to happen. It's a matter of when, and I don't think it's, it might be 10 years off. It might be less. I think a lot probably depends on Jeff Lurie's health and just how much energy he's a very young 70. He's very active. He puts in a lot of time. I mean, he's not an absentee owner by any stretch. He's the most involved owner I've ever seen. I mean, he's in his office every day at the NovaCare complex. We see him at practice, maybe a couple times a week. He's just around, and he's, he puts a lot into it. So, and I think he really loves doing it. I think he really loves owning a team. That's what he always wanted to do. So, how long he could continue at that pace in his 70s, I don't know, but it's something that it's a very real thing now for the franchise. And, I think Eagles fans are very lucky to have had Jeff Lurie. I mean, you look where this franchise has been in the quarter century he's owned the team. It's been a very successful period. And you go from the vet to the link, and you go from, practicing on a glass-strewn field to the NovaCare complex, which is a really nice facility. And just the culture of the organization and the charity work. I mean, it's a model franchise, and he's a great owner, and they've had great success. I think there's only 3 teams that have been to the playoffs more since he bought the team. I think it's the Packers, Steelers, and Patriots. And all have had at least one Hall of Fame quarterback during that span. So, I think it's something you don't really think about, but it's a pretty important thing when you consider the long-term, the franchise's long-term prospects.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember it's not going to be like one day, here's the baton, Julian, you take it and run with it. It's probably going to be gradual. It's going to make it a little tricky because Julian's already this kind of mysterious figure, and you'd assume that his role, even though he doesn't have a formal position in the franchise or with the team, you'd assume that it's going to kind of just keep growing, because you can't just say, here you go, you're the owner now.
I have a prediction to make. I think in the next 24 months, he'll have a title. Like, he'll be like vice president of administration or something. They'll give him some kind of title in the next year or two. And then they'll just give him a new title every few years. It's some vague title, vice president of, whatever. They love making up titles down there. Howie's had like 30 of them. So I think that in the next 24 months, you'll see him have an official role in the team, and you'll see that start to grow.
That would make sense. I always thank the Eagles for giving Howie back the general manager title, so I didn't have to keep typing executive vice president of football operations every time. This is as close as we get to covering like royalty, and like when you're talking about ownership groups and like waiting to see who's going to take the throne. Don't you feel like that a little bit?
When we were in England in 2018, I went out to Buckingham Palace and watched the changing of the guards and all that. Mm-hmm. That was probably as close as I got to royalty.
That's fair. All right, let's get into some of the other stuff Lurie talked about. A big topic, obviously, is Howie Roseman. He got a contract extension this offseason, 3 years after the current year, so 4 more years under contract. It puts
no avoidable years in that contract.
No avoidable years, and to spread out the cap hit. Puts him on the same contract cycle as Nick Sirianni. It was going to happen. I don't think anyone was surprised about it. What did you make of Jeff's answer when asked why he did it?
Yeah, I mean, it's as similar as the other answers we've heard when we've asked why he's kept Howie, and it's not, like you said, it's not surprising at all. They speak the same language. They're on the same page with everything, and his answer is basically, yeah, we've had misses in the first round, but being general manager is much more than just a few first round picks, plus everyone's had misses in the first round, which is true. I think Eagles have had a few more than a lot of teams, certainly, but
some bad
you know,
ones, which
what's
is,
that?
some bad ones.
Some terrible ones. Yeah, no question. But he kind of looks at the big picture, and when he thinks about how he thinks about every facet of the organization, and we have a franchise that in the last 5 years has been to the playoffs 4 times and won a championship, and so like that's and then if they don't get to the playoffs the next 2 years, 4 of the last 7 years we've been to the playoffs, but. I mean, he's never going to fire him. Let's be honest. He's never going to. He's GM for life.
Never say never.
Never. I don't think he's ever going to fire him. I think Howie would retire first, but yeah. I mean, he just kind of. I mean, I think they're so similar. I think Jeffrey and Howie are so similar, and look that they have very analytical minds. They're very data driven, and they look at things so much the same way that how can Jeffrey have a negative view of a guy who looks at everything the same way as him, and they agree on everything. And he also mentioned that every first round miss isn't just Howie, it's a collaborative effort, everybody in the front office, just like the hits are, but still there's obviously there's ups and downs with Howie, and Jeffrey kind of sees the ups and writes off the downs as other people.
It's the one thing I wanted to follow up with him on, and we're kind of limited with time and the amount of questions we can ask, but he talked about his process a little bit for kind of trying to evaluate Howie very analytically and not taking personal bias into account. And I kind of wonder how he goes about that. And I'll have to wait 14 months to ask him at this point. But because you'd imagine most of the major decisions Jeffrey makes, he probably makes them in line with Howie. I mean, Howie's probably the first person he goes to run things by or to give his opinions to. So how does he go through that process without, I mean, obviously Howie can't be involved in that. Like, how does he go? Well, maybe he is. I think I should stay, Jeff. How does that whole process work? Who does he lean on? I'd find that fascinating. I don't know if he'd divulge the specifics, but it's fascinating because we all agree that there are things Howie does really well, and we agree that there are some blind spots. But I ultimately agree with you that they really do speak the same language, and we know them well enough to understand that the things Howie says to us that sometimes we roll our eyes to, he says them to Jeff Lurie, and Jeff's probably nodding his head. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no question. I think that's why I feel like he's GM for life, because if Jeff fires him, he'd be firing himself. And maybe Julian will fire him once he takes over. He's like, I never liked that guy. He drafted Danny Watkins, for crying out loud. Time to get him out of here. But who knows? But yeah, I don't have the quotes in front of me, but they're very long anyway and winding, so probably better off not reading them. But I remember when he gave Howie the GM power back after the 2015 season, and his comments yesterday really echoed those when he said back in 2016, he said, I looked at everybody's report on different players, and Howie's players we drafted and players we didn't draft, and Howie's time after time were the most accurate assessment of that player, whether we took him or not. And that's how he looks at Howie, and not going anywhere. And again, look, I don't think Howie's the worst GM in football. I don't think he's the best. Some of the best have worked under him. I mean, Brett Veach worked under him. I mean, both Super Bowl GMs 2 years ago worked under him. But he definitely has his strengths and weaknesses. I think some of these losses in the front office are big ones. He's a guy that has to be surrounded by some really good, and it's true for any GM, but has to be surrounded by some really good personnel guys. We've talked about how Andy Weidel after the draft could be going to Pittsburgh. I think Andy's really good, so that's a concern. But I don't think anybody's surprised how he's got another 4 years here.
Yeah. All right, let's get to a tricky one. He talked about the former quarterback who's been traded twice in the last 14 months.
Nick Foles has only been traded once in the last 14 months.
For now.
Oh, Joe Flacco's been traded twice.
That's true. I don't think he was talking about Flacco.
Okay.
I mean, he took the high road, but he also kind of mentioned he was taking the high road, which that kind of it doesn't necessarily, it takes a little bit out of it. But he did thank him for 2017, which is important. I mean, it's something that does get lost, that they don't win a Super Bowl without him.
Yeah, and I thought it was good that he mentioned that. And, I think it's true. They wouldn't be the number one seed. And who knows, maybe as a 2 or 3 seed, back then a 2 seed got a bye, so who knows. But I really don't believe any of that season happens without almost said it, without the quarterback who preceded Nick that year. And I'm glad Jeff said that, because he does have a major role in that season and that accomplishment, that achievement that team had. So, but he also was, he hinted at, he's not the same guy anymore, and it was disappointing that he couldn't build on that, and he couldn't grow as a player. Another owner, and we'll get to that, had some slightly more pointed comments about that same quarterback yesterday. But then at the end, Jeffrey said, there's a lot more I'd like. Or I don't know his exact words. He said, there's a lot more, but let's just leave it at that. So like he showed great restraint. And look, there's no reason to. I mean, it's been 2 years. There's no reason to pile on at this point. We all know what that quarterback's deficiencies are and were, and we all know what his achievements here were, and they were not insignificant. So I'm glad he put a bow on it. And it's kind of crazy that he's been traded twice since the last time we talked to Lurie.
Yeah, it is really weird. And who knows, maybe if we talked to him right after he was traded the first time, he'd sound more like Jim Irsay yesterday. I can't remember an owner kind of taking shots at a player leaving their franchise like Jim Irsay did yesterday.
I've never seen anything like it, Dave. I mean, he buried him. I mean, he did not pull any punches. I'll give you a couple little blurbs from it. He said, I think the worst thing you can have is a mistake and try to keep living with it going forward. For us, it was something we had to move. I mean, he's calling him an it. I mean, we call him. we don't, he's not using his name. He just calls him it. It's something we had to move away from as a franchise. It was very obvious. I thought the quote about the Jacksonville game, your guys got to, and obviously y'all know the story. If Jacksonville was the worst team in football, they were 15-point underdogs. All the Colts had to do was beat Jacksonville, and they're in the playoffs, and they lost. They were down 26-3, ended up losing 26-11. Your guys got to pick you up and carry you through Jacksonville. He has to do it. Not an option. Has to. No excuses, no explanations. No disrespect to Jacksonville, but I mean, they're the worst team in the league. You play well and hard for the first quarter or so, and they're looking to go to their locker room and clean it out. I've never seen anything like that in my life. You say, my God, there's something wrong here. It needs to be corrected. I think that's how we feel. And he talked about how he was so stubborn. He tried to persuade people to do things differently. And when they don't want to do them differently, he talked about his lack of leadership. It was, I mean, he just crushed them. And look, he's had his issues of his own. And I don't particularly think he needed to do all that. I don't know how you feel about it. I didn't think it was necessary.
Obviously, went over the top a little bit.
Yeah.
But I also understand his point. Like, he's trying to justify why they just cut ties with a player they gave up a first-round pick for.
That has a pick that hasn't been used yet.
Yeah.
So they don't have the player and they don't have the pick. But the contrast between Frank Reich the day before down in Palm Beach and Jim Irsay was striking. I mean, Frank was like, well, he's not a scapegoat. You know, we don't want to make him the scapegoat. You know, a lot of things went wrong. A lot of people didn't play as well as they could have in that game. Or, there's none of that from Irsay. We just went after the one guy.
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
It was
and in addition to that quarterback, and we handled that beautifully, by the way, a lot of talk about Jalen Hurts down here from all three members of the Eagles brass, all very complimentary. And look, the one thing from Nick Sirianni when asked about all the rumors said, well, we're showing our support for him by our actions. And that was one thing I went, well, I mean, are you really though? Because there's been interest and all that. But you said it to me before the pod, so I'll let you say it now about what you've kind of taken away from hearing these three guys this week.
It just seems like I'm pretty convinced they're not taking a quarterback, I guess, is the bottom line. I think everything points that way. It still wouldn't shock me. And I know they've been linked to different guys. They went out to dinner with the Pitt kid, and they seem really interested in Malik Willis, who I don't think will even be on the board when they pick. But I just think they've been so effusive in their praise, all of them, from Jeffrey to Nick to Howie. And it's been praise that I don't think you would hear if in their mind they were still trying to decide, should we take a quarterback or not? I think if Russell Wilson fell in their lap, I don't think they would have hesitated to trade for him. But none of these guys is Russell Wilson. And I think when they evaluate quarterbacks, it's due diligence. And I think Howie's talked about that. And they evaluate every player that could be available. Who knows? In 5 years, you're looking at a free agent quarterback and, well, we have a relationship with Kenny Pickett or whatever it is. I just feel like they're not taking a quarterback. I feel like I don't always know when people are lying or when they're telling the truth. It's hard to tell sometimes. Some people are really good at lying, but it just seems genuine. Their belief in Jalen and their belief in his growth potential and what he could become seems genuine. And I just don't think there's any better options right now. I think it all kind of adds up to, they talk about we want to get more weapons for Jalen. We want to create an offense that he can thrive in. I just think it all points to him being here. And I could be wrong. Maybe my instincts are wrong, but I just feel like they're going to go defensive wide receiver in the draft and run it back with Jalen.
Yeah, and I think it's a wise decision at this point, given the choices. And the one thing everyone in the organization always says about Jalen, and I tend to agree with it based on how much we know about him, is that he's going to do everything he can to get better. And right now I look at it like where we are in 2022, that matters, right? Because he is still so young. He's coming off his first year as a starter. So you want to give him that opportunity to continue to improve because there was improvement. I know it ended on a sour note and it's really tainted our view of Hurts quite a bit because of that playoff game, but there was growth in year 2. So there's reason to think there's going to be more growth in year 3. And I'm fine with that outlook for right now. But I wonder if there comes a certain point in his career where knowing he's going to maximize is no longer worth it. We're not there yet, but I'm like looking into the future and wondering at a certain point, that's not good enough. It's good enough for me right now.
Right.
Because right now I don't know what he's going to be. I agree with their assessment that he's going to put in the work this offseason. They're going to have a chance to really mold what they want to do around him, and we'll see how it all plays out. But at a certain point in the future, that can't be enough anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm with you on that. They keep reminding us he's 23. He'll be 26 and be like, oh, he's 23. So I think that's like they really want us to remember he's a young guy. I mean, he's younger than Kenny Pickett. Mm-hmm. He's a young guy who has 18 starts under his belt. 19 including the playoffs, and did get better from rookie year to last year. So, but they got to get him some help. I mean, you can't go into it with Goddard, Devontae, Quez, Zach Pascal. I mean, there's got to be more there. So, and they're alluding to that as well. I mean, I think they seem to be thinking receiver. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Well, they keep saying they want to get him help, but they're at times are
contradicting anymore.
Well, yeah, but at times they're contradicting that as well, because it was Howie the other day talked about wanting to get their guys more targets, like looking at it in terms of, well, you have Devontae Smith, he's going to need more targets. Quez Watkins is a good player, he needs more targets. Dallas Goedert needs his targets. All that might be true, but you still have to try to improve. Like, you can't just and there was one question I asked Nick Sirianni that I don't think he really had an answer for. But I asked him, how do you project what a young receiver is going to be in that next year? Because if they're going to go into this season relying on Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins, who, look, I think we all agree that Devontae has superstar potential, and we agree that Quez Watkins is at least a good player who has potential to get better. But if you're going to rely on those guys, how do you know? Like, how do you project that they're going to do that? It's got to be a tough deal, because Nick said they go back, look at their tape, figure out what they have to fix, and fix it, which is, I guess, the only way to really go about it. But it's a little risky just assuming these guys are going to get better and that's going to be good enough.
You must have read my story. Didn't I do like 10 reasons Devontae Smith will be better in 2022? You might have read that piece, possibly. But yeah, no, it's I mean, there's certainly a lot of receivers who have a big rookie year, a big second year, and then don't ever repeat it or don't ever get better. A lot goes into it. So there's a lot of unknowns there. Devontae, I think is a guy who there weren't a lot of easy catches for him last year. And I think once, if Jalen could develop a little more anticipation on his throws, get rid of the ball a little sooner, I think that'll get him a few more catches. And, because so many of his catches were circus catches on the sideline and really difficult balls that he made great plays on. So it's all going to come with growth in the offense. You would hope, Jalen being the second year in the offense and getting a little more accurate, a little more thrown with a little more anticipation, but it's not a given. There's no doubt about it. I mean, maybe what we saw from Devontae is what he's going to be. I just think either way, they need more. They need a lot more. I really believe that.
I don't know if a lot more. I think one more player.
Well, yeah, but I mean, by a lot more, I mean like not just a veteran, another Zach Pascal. Yeah. They need a stud.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Anything else from Sirianni that kind of stuck out to you?
No, I think that was the main.
Well, we talked. I was trying to set you up for the run pass stuff.
Oh yeah.
What did you make of that? Because it was interesting.
Up here on the. See, I liked it better when the rundown was line by line. It's like a big blob now. Yeah, no, that was interesting, and it's something I asked Nick about back in December. I remember, and he said, "Yeah, we got to get better at throwing the ball." And he revisited that. The questions had to do with. They were really good questions about can you sustain success being a run heavy team? And he said, "Yeah, you can." But he also conceded we have to be a better passing team. So those are both true. I mean, there's been a lot of teams that have been really good running the ball that have won championships, but they've also been really good throwing the ball or had like a number one defense. Like if you're going to be run heavy, you got to either be better, way better than they were throwing the ball, or have like a historically great defense. And that's the only way you can win. And most teams that win, and I broke it all down year by year, I think there's been 3 teams in the last 20 years that have had a top 10 running game, but not a top 10 passing game, and have won a Super Bowl. And they've all had Hall of Fame quarterbacks. So it's really hard. You can do it. There are different ways to skin a cat. You can win by being run first, but it's really hard to do in the modern NFL, and not very many teams do it. And if you're going to do it, you really need an elite defense. So they go hand in hand. But there's no question they have to be able to throw the ball at a significantly better rate, efficiency, effectiveness than this past year. Being able to run the ball is great, but you have to do so much more. And I think he understands that. I think he knows that. They had a nice stretch there where they got into something that was working for them almost by accident. It just started to work in that Detroit game, and they stuck with it. But over the long term, while it's great to be able to run the ball, I just don't think that's a roadmap to win a championship. I think if you want to win a championship, you've got to have a really evolved passing game. Running game doesn't hurt, but it's not enough.
The last thing from the owners' meetings we wanted to get to, the rule changes. Both of the Eagles' rules that they proposed, along with other teams, passed. The one is about front office executives creating a window of time where those guys can be hired. And we know why the Eagles did it. They just lost Ian Cunningham and Brandon Brown in the same offseason. It's tough losses. And right now, and it's a really important time for the front office. And I don't think there was much resistance from a lot of teams on that. I think everyone understood why they wanted to get that done. But the other one, the more interesting one.
Let me just add that.
Yeah.
What it does is it pushes those kind of hires, and those guys both got hired. And I think Ian was at the end of January and Brandon was early February. But teams can't hire lower than GM level guys for a promotion until after the draft. So even if you're under contract, teams now after the draft are required to allow candidates to interview for promotions to like assistant GM positions. When in the past, up until this year, they could do it as soon as the season was over. So it's now there's a window from the end of the draft till June 30th. You can make those hires. So I think it's fair.
Yeah, you can see why a team wouldn't want that. You have someone who is in every draft meeting, every free agency meeting with a division rival right now. That's a tough deal. And you understand why Howie doesn't want that.
Yeah.
The other one, overtime, it looked like a compromise here that, and this was something the Eagles pushed for. Jeff Lurie was really happy that it passed. Both teams get the ball in overtime. It's pretty simple. Right now, if the first team scores a touchdown, it's over. And this gives the opportunity for both teams to touch the ball. I'm curious to see what it'll do. Like, do you think teams will go for two? And it's only for the postseason, by the way.
Yeah, only for the postseason. And I understand. I know that somebody thought that might happen. I just think it's too risky. I don't think teams will do that. Well, it's interesting because by the time you get to overtime, defenses are wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly it would be a very aggressive thing to do. It's funny because up until 10 years ago, field goal won an overtime game. Mm-hmm. But the game changes, and it's like we're at the point where like a 54-yard field goal is like a layup now for kickers. It's like a 70% kick, which is crazy to think about. But that's the reality. So teams would get like 2 first downs, kick a field goal, and the game is over. And I think I looked it up. 10 out of the 12 overtime games since the rule was changed, the team winning the coin toss has won the game. In 7 of those 10, they won it on their first possession. The obvious one, I think, that created the groundswell to change the rule was the Bills-Chiefs game. And, Josh Allen never got to go on the field. And, of course, it came back to bite the Chiefs the next week. They actually won the coin toss the next week. They lost in overtime. But I think it's a good rule. The game keeps changing. You have to make rules that keep up with the game. And it's such an offensive game now that getting on the field first was such an advantage. Teams their season would end without their offense getting on the field. It was not right. It left a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm glad they passed us.
I'm kind of assuming this is going to eventually be the full-time rule in the regular season too.
Yeah, it's interesting. The disparity is not as
I don't
great.
like having different rules in the playoffs than you have in regular. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, one difference is that playoff games go on forever. They can't end in ties, obviously. But I'm with you on that. There's a much smaller disparity as far as who wins overtime games in a regular season. That's probably because there's so many more that you have regression to the mean. So that 10 out of 12 is probably like if you played 120, it wouldn't be 100. It would be closer to half. So I'm guessing that's why. But I would agree. I would think.
Or theoretically, I'm thinking if better offensive teams are in the playoffs, so you'd think there's a higher success rate.
Could be
on first possessions.
That's certainly possible, but you would think there's better defenses too.
True.
So, but yeah, hopefully they change the rule for all games. I would think they would after this year.
Yeah. You got anything else? We did want to mention another former Eagles player signed elsewhere, Genard Avery, heading to Pittsburgh on a 1-year deal. Kind of a weird deal. He played a somewhat significant role in this past season as their Sam linebacker, but Eagles got quite an upgrade there. Different kind of player in Hassan Reddick. I can't believe that they view that position as that important, and they had Genard Avery there last year.
Yeah, and we kept waiting for the other shooter. We were like, who's going to play the Sam? And just kind of by default, he ended up doing it. I don't know the guy was here 2.5 years, started 12 games last year. I don't know if anybody who started 12 games in a season created less of a ripple when he left than Genard Avery. Like nobody even noticed. It was pretty much a done deal once they signed Reddick. But did we ever talk to Genard Avery in the 2.5 years he was here?
Right after the trade, at his locker.
We talked to him at his locker. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah. Pre-pandemic.
So he was a weird player. I mean, he made a few plays and then he would disappear for weeks on end. But you're right. It's a pretty dramatic upgrade they have at that spot.
Yeah. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. Rube, I got a flight to catch. It wouldn't be the worst thing if I miss it, but
well, it's going to be 72 up here tomorrow. So as soon as you get back, it's going to be warm.
That is absolutely perfect.
Well, Dave brought the warm weather back up with him.
All right. Take care, guys. We'll talk to you next week.